This, by the way, is Melanie in Charlottetown and has joined us. She's a former Miramichi resident and sometimes is able to join us. Hi, John. Okay. Although you can't see him right now because he's hiding behind Peter King, it's certainly a great pleasure to welcome to our meeting and to Miramichi, to Jim and Jean. Wonderful. Jean, I lost you. There you are. Okay. I'm going to read my notes here to do this properly. So Jim has always had a strong interest in nature and birds in particular. This comes from his dad, who painted, sketched, and carved birds and animals as a hobby. When he was just a little lad, his father took him for walks in the woods on his shoulders, because Jim apparently at that stage was too small to walk too far. A retired professional accountant, he now has more time to spend in the field observing and taking photographs, which he loves to share with interested audience, including us. Jim has had the privilege of serving in a number of related roles as a volunteer, including the president of the St. John Naturalist Club, chair of the NBA Records, Bird Records Committee, and chair of the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. He provides weekly comments, as many of us know, on birds for the sightings page in the Telegraph Journal. And I think also it gets to the Moncton paper too, I think, and okay. It says other newspapers. And he contributes from time to time to the CBC radio, discussing nature-related topics. In 2018, Jim was awarded the Roland Michener Conservation Award by the Canadian Wildlife Federation for outstanding conservation research. In 2019, he was invested in the Order of New Brunswick, and in 2022 received the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal in New Brunswick. Each of his long-term commitment to wildlife conservation in this, each for his long-term commitment to wildlife conservation in the province. Now I'm going to add my own little note here. In preparing a history of our club over the last few months, and one of the things I did was I went through 50 years of Nature and Me's publication, the NB Naturalist. So when I got to volume 14 of issue 1 of 1984, I came across a 5-page article written by Jim. Jim had an experience that I can relate to some ways. While on Grand Manan Island, Jim had a good look at a bird he was certain was very, very rare. After frantically fetching his separated birding partner, Cecil Johnson, who had the camera, the bird was relocated, and where'd I go here? And a few photographs were taken before the bird left, never to be seen again. This was in the pre-digital photography era. There were a few anxious moments or a few anxious weeks, but when the slides came back with confirmation from a number of experts, it was determined to be not only a stone chat, but a Serbian stone chat. An old world thrush. I actually have a picture of here, but it's going to be too hard to get to it. I'll put it on later. Not Jim's picture, but another one. An old world thrush and a Siberian subspecies not previously reported in North America. So that was a great find. So Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. It's not that I'd almost forgotten about that, because I certainly is in my memory very clearly, but it just shows you how coincidental something like that can be. Because anybody could have gone down there that morning, seen a bird they didn't recognize, and hopefully get a picture of it. So it didn't take anything special except pure crossing paths with something really interesting. But that's the way to go. That's what makes birding so interesting. All right, I will stand somewhere where people can see me. I guess I'm.
Well, I'll go to the slideshow here in a moment.
Okay. Anyway, I'm here to talk about monarch butterflies. So I understand you folks have got a special patch or field of milkweed somewhere in this area. Did I understand that through probably, I don't know who was it told me about that, but you're thinking, sorry, some folks here thinking about tagging monarchs this year. Is that an idea someone had? Okay, we're expecting.
Yeah.
Maybe it was somewhere else. I had thought that maybe there was some interest in tagging, because I am going to touch on tagging monarch butterflies along with the life cycle. But in order to talk about monarchs at all, I think we should go through the life cycle of the monarch and start to finish. It's not that long a presentation, but I think it's very important, because in order to understand monarch butterflies and their needs and their conservation, we all need to be on the same page, which means we need to start with that life cycle from square one through to the end. Okay, so that's what I'm here to do tonight. And we can have all kinds of questions. Anybody has questions at the end or during the course of this, you're very welcome to ask. Okay, so if I don't cover something, or Jean, if you see me miss something that's important, you let me know. Okay. All right. So we have the monarch, an amazing butterfly story. And it certainly is, because the monarch butterfly is very unique among insects. I'm a bird person. I'm captivated by monarch butterflies. And I can tell you, I remember vividly the first time I ever met, quotation marks, a monarch. And that was at Point Lefroy, where we do a lot of our tagging. And I had no idea about how important it was for monarchs at the time, but there was a thistle patch of nice blooming English thistles right beside our bird observatory, where we spend a lot of time monitoring migration of birds, seabirds up and down the Bay of Fundy. And so here was this monarch butterfly, and it was very engaged in nectaring on this plant. So I get over and I get closer and closer, and pretty soon I'm within touching distance of it, but I didn't want to disturb it because it seemed to be enjoying itself so much. But I finally reached over and actually picked it off the plant. Normally they're more wary than that, but when I picked it up and made that physical contact with the monarch butterfly, I realized that it has stiff wings, much more rugged than any butterfly I'd ever seen. On my fingers, there were no scales that came off that might have come off on a smaller, let's call it lesser butterfly. But then I suddenly realized these guys are made to fly all the way to Mexico. So they can't be too flimsy. They've got to be built more rugged. All right, so we're going to do the monarch and amazing butterfly story. There we go. All right. There you have it. How many have never seen a monarch butterfly? No. Everybody, you haven't seen one yet, but you will, I'll bet. Okay, so most of you have at least seen one, right? Okay, not every orange butterfly, by the way, in New Brunswick is a monarch, but they're the biggest and the most visible. Okay.
It was working before, wasn't it?
We need our slide to advance.
I can do it for you, but,
Can you?
oh, yes,
It'd be nice if I can do it through here.
I agree, but I'm not, it was working.
It is orange, black, and white, and it's about the wingtip to wingtip, about the width of a human hand. 10 centimeters, 4 inches. It's our largest butterfly that we have in New Brunswick and in the Maritime. Next slide. Okay, next, give it another one. Okay, and another one. Here we have a female monarch butterfly. Let's have another one, Peter. And caption. This is a male. Does anybody notice a difference between the two? They're orange, black, and white. See any differences physically between the two?
The left one's ribbed. Body is ribbed, body marking.
Yeah. The body markings are a little different. That's not a real definitive thing. Yes.
There are sun glands on the males and the.
Yep, you're absolutely right. That is one of the features. That little spot right there and right there is lacking on the female. So the male has the pheromone sacs, or they're actually the false pheromone sacs on the wings, and the females do not. And the other distinction is the veining in the wings.
All right.
The veining, which is the black lines here, these veins. The males are much thinner than the females. Female is much thicker. Okay? So those two features, there are other physical differences, but that's the most obvious of those two. Okay? So the females on the left, the males on the right. Now, you gotta remember this because there's gonna be a test at the end.
Do you take questions?
Sure, yeah.
Are you gonna talk about why there may be those differences later on, or?
Well, I can tell you that the pheromone sacs, not in monarchs apparently, but in some insects certainly are attractive for the other sex, right?
Right,
But apparently these are false pheromone sacs. So,
okay, the females, you're saying like the wings are, more ribbed, stronger, like,
yeah,
more ribbed, is that like a structural thing, or? are there
I don't think so. It's just a physical difference in appearance, I guess. I'm really not sure any more than that. But the way these butterflies get together is they both are attracted to milkweed patch when it comes time to breed. So the males will go to the milkweed patch and hang out there, and the females will come, and then that's how they meet. So they don't have to attract each other with
No.
pheromones necessarily. Okay,
And just to know if it's sort of like the first thing I noticed wasn't what was mentioned here, but the number of dots, the number of spots seem to be more on the female. And I'm noticing on that central rib or spine or whatever you call it.
on the body here.
Yeah, that looks.
That's just a factor of light, I think, and
Okay.
the difference in individuals. Yeah, I don't think there's any real difference. And the number of spots around the wings, they vary a certain part. Okay, so the important thing in the monarch's life, and they would not be able to reproduce if it wasn't for milkweed plants. Milkweed. Their entire reproductive cycle revolves around the availability of milkweed. And milkweed is found across North America, and we'll talk about different species. But the adults have to lay their eggs on milkweed. And then the caterpillars that hatch from those eggs have to have milkweed plants to feed on. They will not be able on any other plant to reach maturity and become an adult monarch butterfly. So they have to have milkweed. It's essential. Okay? Once they become adult butterflies and start flying around, they then need nectar on flowers. But milkweed is essential for reproduction. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. This is now working.
Yes, it is, yeah, I know. Hands off.
So the first one, if we go back, this is common milkweed. This is the one that grows wild in fields, along roadsides, in various parts of New Brunswick and the Maritimes. And it has a sort of a paddle-shaped leaf, and it grows quite tall. Some plants actually have been, I've seen 6 feet tall. On average, they're probably anywhere from chest height to waist height, and they're growing in patches. And they spread through rhizomes that spread out through the soil, okay? So you don't want them in your garden because they will take over the garden eventually. But if they're growing in a field or a wild place, they will populate as far as there's enough soil outward over time. So common milkweed is sort of the backbone of the monarch population reproducing here in the Maritime. But there's also another. This is swamp milkweed. It's not common in New Brunswick, but it does grow along damp places in a few spots along Miramichi. There's some. And it's a great garden plant because it doesn't have to be in a wet place. And its root system is fibrous root system that doesn't spread out. You have individual plants that grow as a clone and spread out and become a perennial in your garden. And that's the end of our house. We have a patch of swamp milkweed that's been producing monarchs for years. And so swamp milkweed has a narrower leaf, a little sharper pointed leaf than the common. Well, two completely different plants serving the same purpose as far as monarch butterflies are concerned.
The common is also a perennial or not?
It is, the common is, that's right. Thank you.
Hit and miss. Not working for me either.
Flowers similar?
Flowers are roughly similar, yes. They're pink flower and they have a wonderful aroma and they will attract pollinators like crazy. Bees, flies, wasps, and monarchs, and other butterflies. So the story of the life cycle, I like to start it in the winter in Mexico.
Just on the swamp versus the common. I was always hearing that they prefer swamp milkweed, but is there a difference?
I don't think there is. They'll certainly go for both because common milkweed's more widespread. I've seen a lot more caterpillar eggs and young on common than on swamp. But I think locally down home, they seem to like both. Doesn't really matter. So our story starts in Mexico, and it starts in the neo-volcanic mountains down in this area west of Mexico City. And the monarchs migrated there last fall. And they aggregated on the tops of high mountains. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. And in the spring, they instinctively, already they've moved. Late March, the days are getting longer, warmer down there. They're at high altitude, mind you. And they're going to instinctively fly toward the north, toward the southern United States, toward Texas, Louisiana, maybe Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's in here, because this is where they're going to find milkweed starting to grow there. And they have to find it because they've been there all winter and their lives are starting to wind down. They're only going to live for a few more weeks. So they have to fly north about 500 miles out of Mexico and reach the southern US where the first milkweed they can encounter is growing and coming out of the ground. This is a late March, early April. So they fly north from Mexico to southern Texas, Louisiana, and find that first milkweed. The sole objective, instinctively with them, at that point, the males and the females, is to find fresh milkweed and to lay eggs on the milkweed. So they will copulate in Mexico and on the way north to find each other, but they're all together in Mexico, coming out of sort of quasi-hibernation. And both sexes then die after a life of 8 months. They were probably born in Canada in early August the previous year, and now it's early April. Hopefully they've found what they need, they've laid the eggs, and then both sexes die. Now, the eggs are on milkweed plants. The adults are dying. So what happens with the eggs? It takes about a month for the egg to go from egg to caterpillar, the caterpillar to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually go into a chrysalis, cocoon, and then be in that for a while, and then emerge as an adult butterfly. So just about 30 days is required on average for that to happen. So early April, by early May, you're going to have a new crop of butterflies, and they're going to fly north instinctively, and they're not going to live as long. And do they, well, okay, let me say, it's going to take several generations because they only live 2 to 6 weeks, this second, third, fourth generation of summer, in order to find milkweed and lay their eggs. So the wintry ones live 8 months. The succeeding generations from spring and summer, 2 to 6 weeks is their lifespan, and then they die. So they have to keep moving. They have to find milkweed in order to sustain the population. When do they reach New Brunswick? Well, and they're in southern United States by early April, by early May, early to mid-May. There's a generation ready to go further north. It takes 2 or 3 generations for them to reach New Brunswick. And we're at the northeastern limit, southern Canada, of milkweed distribution. And New Brunswick is just about at the St. John River, the limit of where common milkweed is abundant in the Maritimes. It's being found other places, but not nearly as much as further south and west of St. John River. Historically, we had limited numbers of monarchs breeding in New Brunswick. Most arrive here late June or early July. So if it takes a month to raise another generation, they would arrive here, lay eggs early July, and by early to mid-August, we have another generation. But that generation is the one that's going to fly all the way to Mexico. So this is a female laying an egg on a fresh milkweed leaf. This was in Jean's garden. She was very proud to have milkweed growing in the garden, except she maybe tear it up when it started to spread. Anyway, female laying an egg, and she lays it on the underside of the leaf. She puts her abdomen on the underside of the leaf, deposits this sticky little egg that's sort of shaped like a football, and it sticks to the underside of the leaf. And then she'll move on to another plant, plant another egg on the underside of another leaf, and so on around the milkweed patch. And she has the capacity to lay between 400 and 600 eggs in her 2 to 6 week lifespan. She'll populate a given milkweed patch and go looking elsewhere for more milkweed. But 1 egg at a time. 1 egg at a time, yeah. these are monarch eggs, one here, another here. Normally she moves around a bit more, but obviously this one, or maybe two females laid eggs on one leaf. They look like little tiny, almost pinheads, very small, and kind of a creamy white color. And they look, as I said, like a miniature football.
So
That's-
anything else that would be confusing someone like me if I saw the underside of them?
Yes, yes, sometimes spiders will lay on milkweed or other insects, but the eggs don't look quite like this. They could be round, okay, but these are not. This, as I said, looks a bit like a football. Now, Bev England is a member of our St. John Naturalist Club and does a lot of work with us down in the St. John Point de Croix area. And she's a wonderful photographer, sort of a close-up photography, macro. So she took these photographs, and I've not seen any others quite like it, of an egg and eggs and caterpillar on some milkweed plants that she had. So this is a freshly laid little egg, probably day one, fresh, stuck there with a little bit of adhesive to the hairy underside of a milkweed leaf. Because the underside of the leaf is, as you can see, is covered with all kinds of little tiny hairs, and that has a purpose on it. So 3 days or so later, takes another picture, and the egg is looking different. It has a dark hump. What's going on? Well, there's obviously development going on in that little egg. Remember, it's only the size of about the head of a pin. And by golly, she happened to be right there when the little guy pops out. She got a whole series of fantastic pictures here. And this little tiny caterpillar, it's, remember, the size of the egg, little caterpillar, you can barely see it, barely see it. So it comes out, and what's the first thing that it does? It eats the eggshell to recycle the nutrients into its body and get its digestive system working. And the next thing it does, it doesn't start to eat the leaf, which it will later on when it's older. It will start to feed on the little tiny hair-like projections on the bottom of the leaf. And that gets a start. And it starts to grow, starts to eat, it starts to poop like crazy and grow more and eat more and so on and so on. And it's going to take, this took about 3 to 4 days for the egg to hatch. It's going to take about another 18 days for this caterpillar to get to the point where it's going to go into chrysalis, which is the third stage of life. But for now, it's very tiny. This is a sort of a comparative picture of a range of sizes of young monarch caterpillars. Now, you can see the color, very unique here. The monarch caterpillar was black, white, and yellow. Now, in nature, some things that are slightly poisonous can tend to be quite brightly colored. And you'll see that's the case here. It's not just a dull little, drab caterpillar, quite brightly colored and patterned. That's because the milkweed plants, the sap, has a poison in it. But nothing but the milkweed. But the caterpillars imbue their system. It doesn't hurt them, but they become not poisonous slightly to other animals, birds, mice, etc. So that it's thought that the correlation of quite a brightly colored, like some snakes, like the coral snake, for example, is very brightly colored, but it's highly, highly poisonous. Well, these guys are mildly poisonous, but they have this coloration. So very distinctive. There's not another caterpillar that looks like it. So on the left, you have go back.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. On the left. There we go. I got it. I think Peter's working for me now. So
Yeah, I know.
Okay. On the left, we have one or two stages up. There's 5 stages of growth where the caterpillar has to shed its skin like a lobster or a snake would because it outgrows it. So the skin splits, then they have to grow more, and then a fresh.
They're called in stages,
Yeah, instars.
instars.
Instars, yes, right. Instar 1, instar 2. So the 5th instar is when they go into chrysalis. Well, that's the various stages of growth. So see how small this one is. This one is mid-size, and you can see where it's eating the leaf now. And this one is just about ready to go into chrysalis. By the time it gets to that 5th instar stage, it's about the size of your little finger. Pretty fat guy. And so I don't know how many, like 2,000 times bigger than the little one that came out of the egg. Something like that, 2,000 times more bulk. Now, in nature, the milkweed patch would be here, and the caterpillars, when they are ready to go into chrysalis, they stop feeding, and they would crawl out of the milkweed patch and go to a nearby shrub or a tree, or even a blade of grass or some object like the edge of your shed's roof or something, crawl in there, and then they would go into chrysalis there naturally. But in order to raise monarchs, we bring them in, we supply milkweed, put the eggs and the caterpillars on there, and when they're ready to go into chrysalis, they would climb out instinctively trying to get to a shrub, and we end up with a wire mesh roof on there, and that's where they will go into chrysalis. So you have them enclosed right in the system. So we change the milkweed every day or every other day because they'll eat it right up. All that little black stuff is frass, which is because they clean that every day. And so now we have on the top an array of monarch caterpillars going into chrysalis and some chrysalises that are already underway. So let's have a look at what goes on the top of one of these aquariums. This is a fish aquarium when you're actually raising monarch butterflies for educational purposes. So this is a caterpillar, mature size, ready to go into chrysalis. It climbs up, can't get out, so now it's going to spin right on the cross wires, a little pad of silk, white silk. And it has little hooks in its rear end, and it attaches those into that little pad of silk, which you can see here, and eventually lets go with its legs and drops straight down, and eventually curls into what we call a J shape, a J shape. And the purpose of that is to shed its skin. Wants to shed that skin and then proceed to go into chrysalis. So as it's doing this, inside that caterpillar are huge chemical changes happening that we can't see on the outside. It wants to split the skin right down the midline, right down the back, right here. And of course, if you bend your finger like it's doing, the pressure is right on the knuckle, right? And that's exactly what it's doing, trying to pop that skin. And if necessary, it will take more air into its thorax to pop that skin. Okay? So what you're going to see next, and this was taken in one of our aquariums, is the stages of it doing what I just described. So there, pop, right there. You can see that it just broke the skin here. And what happens next happens in about 2 minutes or less. And it wiggles and it shakes. And now it's got to get rid of that old skin that's on there. And it does. It drops to the floor. And it's able now to dry. And we now have a completely different animal here. It's no longer a caterpillar. It's a chrysalis. And it has to dry. And it has to harden a sort of a shell on the outside, which it does, contracts. And eventually, after a few hours, it looks like this. Now, this is not on the top of the cage. This one happened to be on a stick that I brought into the house in order to take some pictures. So it's now day 1, and we have this little jewel case with life inside that is going to develop over the next 10 to 12 days in summer, 10 to 12 days on average. And we like to rear these outside now, not inside, because then it has the natural light, day, night, because inside our artificial lights can interfere with the development a little bit. So that's the first day. This is day 11 in this case. And suddenly it stops looking like green and it becomes translucent. And we can see something inside that looks vaguely familiar. It looks like a butterfly wing. But normally this happens as the afternoon progresses, because the next morning it's going to come out. They don't come out late in the day because they have to dry their wings. They have to get ready to fly so they usually come out early in the morning or mid-morning, depending on the day and the climate or the temperature. So in order to get pictures of this next phase, Jean, I had to go fishing, didn't I, Jean? I went salmon fish that weekend. And so Jean had to man the camera to get these pictures. So she gets full credit for these. So what we're going to see is going to split right here, okay? She normally goes, because it's Sunday morning, you normally sing in the choir at the church. You put that off, wonderful duty,
Didn't have a choice.
and you took pictures, okay? Close-ups. So, and I'm with her, but I'm away, but I'm in spirit. So anyway, there it splits, okay? There's the moment. And this is the thing, because again, within 2 minutes, all of this is going to happen. It's very quick. You could go get a cup of coffee and miss it. So she was there, the split. Remember, this is going to happen just in a very short span of time. And suddenly, pop, out comes, well, it could be a butterfly. Kind of looks like it. But what we're seeing here is the abdomen is huge because it's full of blood. And the wings are like two little flags that have been all bunched up in a bag. So what it's going to do, it's going to pump the blood from here, its abdomen, into the wings. So it wants gravity to be its friend. It wants to turn around so gravity can help the process, which it does. It hangs on to the empty chrysalis shell, and it begins to pump that blood into the wings. And at the same time, its proboscis, which is the feeding tube that it would put into a flower. And then once it's an adult, they have to have nectar. It's in two halves. And the two halves have to be knit together like, well, you know how the veins of a feather, okay, they're little hooks, right? They have to hook together. So it's working on one end and on the other end to try to get it together, literally, in the next several hours. So that's at 10:05. It came a starting point at 10 o'clock. And this is probably 30 minutes later, whatever. And this is an hour and a half after. The blood is now pumped into the wings. The wings are still very, very soft, very, very pliable. It's got to dry those wings in the remainder of the day and hopefully take its maiden flight from wherever it is, you know, in nature, on a shrub or something, up into a high tree for the night. It won't feed its first day, but it'll at least get off the ground into a protected area. So here we have a perfectly minted new monarch butterfly. Monarchs are an ideal way to introduce kids to nature. Butterflies generally are, or other insects, because unfortunately birds can tend to fly away and you have to have binoculars. These guys are at a child's level down on plants, and it's just a perfect way to open kids' eyes, to open kids' eyes to nature, the wonders of nature. That's our granddaughter, who's now 22. So we want to go back, having seen this process now, okay, we want to go back and revisit the monarchs and milkweeds, because milkweed is so important. So it's the sole food plant for monarch caterpillars, obviously. Reproduction is totally dependent on the plants. So think about this. If milkweed disappeared, monarchs would go with it. They don't have the ability to work with other species of plants, or other types, other families of plants. There's 100 species in North America of milkweeds, but only about a dozen are used for reproduction by monarchs. It depends geographically where you are. Here we have two kinds. We have the swamp and common. Sap, as I mentioned earlier, that white milky sap has a heart poison in it, a mild poison that apparently makes a caterpillar and the adult butterfly, because they're both imbued with this, distasteful to predators and also slightly poisonous. So, you wouldn't want to be messing with these guys if you can avoid it. The cardinalides, the heart poisons, provide some protection from predators, because if you're going to migrate all the way to Mexico, that helps. And also spend the winter down there, it helps. There are predators down there that do feed on the millions of monarchs, but it certainly is a deterrent. There again, Peter. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So we want to go back again and revisit the fall monarchs versus the spring and summer monarchs. Now, the fall monarchs are the ones that just came out here in southern Canada, New Brunswick. And so unlike the spring monarchs, which only live 2 to 6 weeks, we now are in August, and the days are doing what?
they're getting shorter in August, right? And the sun's arc in the sky is midsummer, it's high overhead. By mid-August, it's lower in the sky. And when that sun arc gets apparently about within 57 degrees of the Earth's surface and below, that causes the monarchs to no longer have the urge to reproduce. It switches that off in their brain, and they now have an instinct to migrate. Yes.
So they're built the same.
They're built the same. Oh yeah, identically. Yeah, yeah. It's just that they put sex on the shelf. Okay, till next spring. They don't know that. It's all instinctive. But they will now live up to 8 months, and that's long enough to migrate to Mexico, winter there, and return as far as Texas and the southern states to find milkweed the next spring.
But the monarchs that live 8 months versus the ones that live 2 to 6 weeks, are physically, or they did
Physically the same.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Great point, because I didn't specify that. Yeah. Thank you.
And Jim,
Yeah.
the monarchs that get here at the end of June, how many generations are there before the ones that go, they're then gonna fly to Mexico?
Well, it can either be one, Pam, or two.
Okay.
If they get here early enough, which happened last year, they arrived fairly early, and it looked like some of them, ones that came earliest, produced one generation. It still wasn't late enough in the year, and that generation that was produced tried to reproduce another, and that's what caused some of them to have eggs and caterpillars way into September. Timing was off a little bit. Too early to migrate, so we'll lay some more eggs. But then it was too late for a lot of them to get further south because of the weather change. So ideally, it seems if monarchs can arrive here in mid-July, which is the case many years, then most of them will only have time to raise one brood. That brood will then be stimulated to migrate because of the sun angle and the amount of light. So if they come too early, it will be an attempt to do two.
So
Normally it's one.
Jim, they have to keep moving north because that's when the fresh milkweed is.
Correct.
Is that why?
That's a great point,
Exactly.
because old milkweed that gets tough and further down is less attractive and harder for these little caterpillars to feed on and be successful in growing up. So the instinct is to move further north and find fresh milkweed. But we're at about the limit of milkweed in North America at our latitude, just about. So this is as far as they'll go further, but they won't find anything. So they'll probably have to come back or just not breed at all. So,
We seem to have a lot of common milkweed around here,
yeah.
but mostly around along railway tracks,
Yes.
because the seeds have been deposited over the years.
Yeah.
From Ashland.
And sadly, and we're going to talk something about this a little later on, but sadly, the railways often spray in the summer to defoliate and keep the vegetation down for visibility and safety, just at the time when the monarchs have eggs or caterpillars on the plants. And there's a move afoot through Nature New Brunswick and some of the folks in our Naturalist Club to cause the railways to switch the timing of that. Do it, but don't do it at that time because of the monarchs being affected. Because you're right, Peter, an awful lot of the milkweed patches are along railway tracks, curiously, but that's where they got a foothold. Yeah. Okay, so we've got it. So the ones that are the last generation are the ones that are going to go over to Mexico in the summer. So they change, obviously, in mid-August because of things I've already mentioned. The shorter days is a stimulus to cease breeding. It just switches off the reproductive urge. Like birds, monarchs become restless. Now, they don't consciously, obviously, know where they're going or why they're going or when they're going, but it's all apparently instinctive. Butterflies are hungry, so they begin to feed not on milkweed. Well, if there were any milkweed blossoms, but it's on blossoms. The adult butterflies will need nectar to fuel their flight and their living, right? They don't need to, they're not going to eat. They don't have the mouth parts to eat milkweed. It's only the caterpillars that do that. They begin a 4,000 kilometer flight to Mexico. 4,000 kilometers, southern Canada, Mexico. But the navigation is purely instinctive because this generation has never gone before. Their great-great-grandparents did. and they're going to go to the same little area in Mexico that relatively little, that their great-great-grandparents would have gone to 1 year ago. Nobody understands how that happens. It's all instinctive, genetically programmed, but it happens. And it's unfailingly happening because monarchs do it every year and carry on the following spring by going back north again. It's amazing. Monarch tagging. Why? Well, first of all, the tagging of monarchs was what led to the discovery by scientists of the wintering areas of monarchs in Mexico. And it was out of the University of Toronto. Entomologists, people there, Dr. Burkhardt and his wife, they came up with the concept of putting tags on these monarchs because they would leave in the fall and go somewhere and nobody knew really where they went. And they would come back in the spring, early summer, didn't know where they came from. So they thought, well, if we put tags of some kind on them, and then in those days, mailing out, this is in the 50s, 60s, mail out to as many people to make them aware. If you see a tag, we can put a pin on the map, okay? And we'll sort of track them and see where they end up going. And eventually, it led to the discovery of the wintering monarch area in Mexico. So tagging, sponsored by Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas today. It's a numbered adhesive wing tags that we put on them. And there's an online database. So we record when we're tagging where, when, who tagged it, the health of the butterfly, the various attributes. We even measure the wings, body weight, and all of that. So all that data, most of it, goes into the database at the University of Kansas. And then if someone reports having seen and maybe sends a photograph or gets the number on that tag, lets them know about that, then they can have a match. So it was tagged at Point Nepean, New Brunswick, and they saw it in the Carolinas, and then maybe saw it further down. There can be a tracking of the migratory routes today. We know where they go now, but we don't know the routes they take to get there. And if those routes can be mapped out over time through continued tagging, then there can be conservation measures taken within those routes to enhance blooming plants, to avoid urban sprawl, and try to preserve those as conduits for monarchs to go, because they will follow mountain ranges, they'll follow major highways, they'll follow seacoasts, they'll follow major rivers, various geographical clues as to their direction. And they obviously orient with the sun somehow and magnetic field and all of that. So that's the purpose of continued tagging, is to try and map out the routes that monarchs go to get to Mexico. So down in Mexico, and the butterflies, and I'm going to take you there in a minute, when the butterflies are there over the winter, some of them die. People who are in the reserves working there, keeping watch over them and guiding people in there, they're not allowed to touch the monarchs, try and find a tag or anything like that. But there's some attrition of the millions that are there. There's natural death. There's death because of sometimes the cold snaps. Also because there's two species of birds that prey on the monarchs down there. There's an oriole and a tanager. And then there's a black-footed mouse that also climbs up in the trees. But they don't make a dent in the population because it's like a raccoon in a cornfield. Same kind of thing. So, but they're paid $5 for each recovery. So they glean underneath in the forest litter, looking for monarchs that would have tags on them that drop to the ground. And it's a poor area in Mexico, so $5 is worth doing. It may be more now, I don't know. Anyway, Point Nepean, which is down south of St. John, about 30-some kilometers along the coast, is one of the best monarch locations in New Brunswick, as it turns out. We happen to have a bird observatory there. Some of you have probably visited that over the years. It's put there originally for seabird migration monitoring, because it's another conduit for migration in the springtime for thousands of seabirds. But we began to realize we were seeing monarchs in August and September where we weren't seeing them anywhere else, but seemed to be concentrated at this point. It turns out, once we started tagging them down there, that they go from Point Nepean, either along the coast toward Maine, or a lot of them go over the water out to Grand Manan and then onto the coast of Maine, or to the Wolves Islands and then onto the coast of Maine. So they're funneled out to the tip of the point, And at the tip of the point, there's all kinds of blooming plants. They need that nectar for the next leg of the journey. So you can see there, those are thistles. That's some of that English thistle I told you. And that's the exact spot that I first picked my monarch off the plant many years ago. And it made a connection with monarch. And there's all kinds of asters. There's old fields near the lighthouse. And this is Department of Fisheries and Oceans land, but they do not disturb the plants. And NB Power owns the land adjacent, the base of the point all the way out. They are not allowing anybody to touch the plants because of the monarchs. No disturbance. We have all kinds of goldenrod. Rough stem goldenrod grows in profusion. So when the monarchs are migrating along, all of a sudden this banquet of nectar is there, and they can see that they're going to have flyable water. So down they come. And we get, sometimes we've had 150 monarchs almost within sight, all nectaring. And we have to be very careful not to disturb them too much in their tagging because we want to put them back on the plant when it's over. Talk about that. But it's a very special place. This is exactly what I picked up. I could go pick it up right now off a thistle. This is a migrating monarch, and they love the nectar in the English thistles that grow along the coast. It's their very favorite, and it's highly nutritious with nectar. So the tags that we use are about in diameter, probably a centimeter diameter, maybe a little less. They come 25 to a sheet on, you can peel them off like you would stamps off a sheet. And on there is monarchtag.org, Monarch Watch, which is the name of the program from the University of Kansas. We buy these tags from the University of Kansas. And then there's a specific ABPB, it's a numeric for, and then 087, there's 088, 092, 093, they're all sequential. So we have a number that we mark, and then all the other data related to that monarch is on our tagging sheet that we maintain. Most of that data goes into the Monarch Watch database. The adhesion, the sticky, the glue on the back, is a specially designed glue that's non-toxic, but very, very sticky to adhere to the monarch's wing without affecting the butterfly. And it's put right on the middle part of the wing. I'll show you in a minute how that goes on. We have to be very careful to apply it without touching the glue because we don't, so we put it on with a special apparatus. Cool. So that's how they come, 25 to a sheet. And this is a monarch with a tag attached, found from Mexico. All the data now has been written down. We take it outside and we put it on a blooming plant, and a lot of them will go right back to nectaring on the plant. So at the end of the day, we don't want to have disturbed them any more than necessary. The paths of migration in the fall for monarchs coming out of southern Canada and the northern United States look something like this as far as is known. The tagging is to be more specific on these routes. But this is the limit of milkweed in North America. And you can see in New Brunswick, just about the St. John River, give or take. Milkweed is spreading and climate change is allowing it to spread better. So, it'll be more expansive as time goes on. But our monarchs are actually further away from down here where they're going to winter than anywhere else east of the Rockies. And this population that we're talking about here, including ours, is monarchs that are born and live east of the Rocky Mountains. There's another population, much smaller, that winters in California, along the coast, some of the big trees there. But all the others, all the big numbers, are thought to go to the neovolcanic belt of mountains in just southwest of Mexico City, in Mexico. It takes about 2 months for them to go from southern Canada, let's say here, anywhere here, all the way down. Okay, and some of them are known as people tracking them and watching them to come down to the tip of Florida, on over to the Caribbean islands, and then down to the Yucatan and in. Others have been seen crossing the Gulf of Mexico, or is it the Gulf of America? It's the Gulf of Mexico, on oil rigs, ships, boats. Butterfly flies along, drops down for a minute or two, and then flies on. That's 600 miles across. So you can imagine. And then most are thought to go around the Gulf and on down through Mexico. And in this area here, just along the Mexican border, Del Rio, we were in that town when we were in Texas, is a major, we know that it's a major concentration. It's a river of monarchs coming through there on their way to Mexico. So we're going to take you there because Jean and I went to the mountains here and up to the top to see 70 million monarchs at the time on top of one of the mountains, two of the mountains in the wintering area. So winter in Mexico. They arrive in neovolcanic mountains in early November. They leave here in August, September, October, November. So that's roughly by early November. And it's a celebration by the local people down there with the arrival of the butterflies. And before the connection was made of where they went for scientists here, people down there knew they came, but didn't know where they came from. So that connection was made in, when was it, 1975, through the tagging efforts of the University of Toronto. They spend the winter, these monarchs that have migrated all this way, feeding as they go on blooming plants, in dense colonies on mature oyamel firs. They're an ancient species of fir tree at 9,000 to 12,000 feet up on the mountaintops in that area. A little area, not very big. The entire winter area is about 62 square miles, 160 square kilometers, about 12 mountaintops within that concentrated area. Some colonies, not as much today, but when we were there in the winter of 2006, 2007, some of the colonies were estimated as 70 million butterflies. Colonies first discovered in 1975 through the tagging efforts, and National Geographic broke the news on the discovery of the wintering area of the monarchs. And I can remember reading that as a much younger person and thinking, man, I'd love to go there. And we did. That woman is still alive. She's quite elderly now, but she's been involved in monarch work and research all the remainder of the time. She and her husband went up there on a hunch that perhaps they could find some butterflies, and they got in them, found all kinds. And so she's quite a famous person. So this is 40,000 feet. You had to get ready for it. So we had a week to acclimatize. We traveled around, and I remember taking this picture, looking up at some of the mountains that we were going to be going up in later in the week. It's the neovolcanic range. We climbed up. I have other photos in a longer presentation, which I didn't bring tonight. Had to climb up the first mountain on a little cattle path. It was privately owned, and the BBC were doing an IMAX film. They'd been up there all winter. This was March. They were about ready to wind up. And so our guide was able to get us in there, but it was not, or we probably shouldn't have been there, but he got us there. And so we kind of practiced our English accents because we were going to pose ourselves as members of the film group, if anybody asked. So anyway, we hiked up and eventually started to get into some smaller oyamel firs, but it wasn't very long before we were getting into clusters of monarchs like this. Now this is in March. During the winter, they sort of like honeybees. They all cluster together in big blobs of clusters of monarchs hanging off the limbs of the trees under the canopy, where it's near freezing, but not quite, and the air is relatively moist. So now they're more active. They're flying around, okay, which was really exciting to see. They were all over the sunny sides of tree trunks. Remember, we're at altitude, so it's a little cooler out there. But the sun was shining. It was a lovely, lovely day. And eventually, sometimes they would something would stir them, or they just whatever, and they would fly around and all leave the trees. And the air would be full of monarchs, completely full. It was just glorious. And we found when we got there, we were talking as normal tones, but within minutes, with all these millions of monarchs around, we were whispering to each other, just unconsciously whispering. But you'd move, and they would move, and you didn't step on them. But some of them land on your head. It was amazing. It was one of the most spectacular, I think the most spectacular thing, and we've seen a good number of spectacular things in nature that we've ever seen. So the colonies are on the mountaintops, and they're concentrated in such numbers that if you take aerial photographs of the mountaintops, you can estimate the number of hectares of butterflies that are overwintering year to year to year. And the World Wildlife Fund is, I think, what is behind this annual census. And it started in 1994, 1995, and this is measuring an estimate of the total wintering population, more or less, okay? They try to do it as consistently as they can to get an accurate estimate of whether the population is stable, going up, going down. And it can vary from year to year, as you can see. But the general trend is very obvious. It's going down, 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 down. So what were the reasons? When this trend became apparent, it took a long time to begin to figure out what the factors were that were causing a decline in the monarch butterfly population. The all-time high was 18 hectares. That was in, 96, 97. We were there in 2006, 7, which was right here. So at that point, it was 6.7, a far cry from the high point, but still pretty respectable. At the low point was 2013, 14, we were down to less than a hectare. Less than a hectare. Since then, things have improved, and they've dropped back again. And this is this winter right here, 1.79, up from less than a hectare again. So that's hopeful, but you have to look at the overall and say, wow, what's going on? Mexico, the United States, and Canada are working together, or at least we hope we're still working together, on monarchs, on monarch conservation. It's a three-way thing because they traverse all three. And turning something like that around doesn't happen quickly, but there's a lot of effort being put into it. So what are the threats? What's happening with monarch butterflies that's causing this decline, and such a massive decline in a relatively short span of time? Logging at the Mexican winter sanctuaries has been a factor, but is lessened now because there's a lot more enforcement at the preserves. But this is a very poor area of Mexico, and big timber is very, very valuable. So there's a lot of illegal logging that takes place. People pay off and they are allowed to get in there, all that. So that is not as bad now as it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It was a major, because what would happen, the monarchs are up in these OML firs under the canopy so that they don't get freezing when it varies a certain amount, and they don't get snow or ice even occasionally when it comes. Once you open up the canopy by logging, now you get a hole in it, and the cold air can get in. And that has killed monarchs in certain winters and certain weather conditions because of the opening up of the canopy. So that's one that has affected some of this. Another one is a lack of milkweed compared to what there would have been in decades ago. And there's reasons for this. This is the biggest single, it's thought to be the biggest single factor, a lack of milkweed generally across the continent at the times it's needed. The times it's needed, because remember, when they come out of Mexico and head up to the southern United States, they have to find milkweed. It's got to be grown there because their lives are running out and they're going to die in a week or two. And they've got to lay eggs so that next generation can carry on. We'll come back to that. But drought has been a factor in the southern U.S., but also the use of herbicides in agriculture. Lack of blooming flowers on migration south. That's interesting. Urban sprawl. And the mowing of roadside margins. Right at the time the monarchs are migrating and often following major highways, we're mowing the grass to make it look nice, mowing it to keep shrubs from growing. Well, if you can change the timing of that from August and September to a little later on, when the monarchs have already gone through, that makes a big change right away. And every state and every province has a Department of Highways. They have to get the message. Those messages have been delivered, and I think things are changing. But that's something that could happen pretty quickly, and it would make quite a difference, because if they don't have the blooming flowers and that nectar, they're weaker in terms of trying to cross the Gulf of Mexico or longer flights, and so it makes a difference. And urban sprawl is when these areas that formerly had blooming plants are now concrete or buildings or whatever. Winter storms at the Mexican sanctuaries with climate change and the opening up of the canopy, our weather is more violent now, more variable. And then what about climate change over the long term? Jury's out on that. Nobody really knows for sure. It might be helpful in some ways, it might not be in others. So weather certainly is going to be a factor, changing weather. So those are all things that are affecting the monarch population over time. Now, that's a picture that I took in southern Texas on a birding trip quite a few years ago. Southern Texas, the area where the monarchs would come looking for milkweed, is largely agricultural. Big fields, just like the prairies. And so this is either corn or soybeans, I don't know which, let's call it corn. Just took a picture of it to illustrate, how massive the fields are and how extensive the agricultural is. Well, what's happened in the last couple of decades is that they've genetically modified the seeds for these crops, for soybean and for corn, so that now you can broadcast herbicides over the entire field, kill everything else except the plants you want to grow, and that's great. Before that, milkweed grew between the rows and all around the margins of these huge fields. Milkweed was there in spades for the monarchs to come and lay their eggs on when they came north. Now it's eradicated in many instances because of the use of herbicides. They wiped it out. So they're having a much harder time finding milkweed. That can be changed as well over time by making sure milkweed gets planted in places that are not sprayed. I mean, you can't not spray apparently, but you can take steps to have milkweed that is not eliminated by it. So that's one of the major factors. It's that first milkweed that they need to get when they come out of Mexico. So I'm going to wrap this up. I know I want to keep you fall asleep. What can we do? What can I do, you do, we do to help? Okay, simple things. Each person can do something. Well, we can plant milkweed here in New Brunswick, either common or swamp. Swamp in gardens, common in places around your property that you could let it spread and everybody's happy. You could protect the wild milkweed that we have. That's really important, recognizing its value to monarch.
I was just wondering, I've never planted milkweed before. What time of year do you plant it so that the plant is ready?
The best way to plant milkweed, that's a great question, is to start it from seed.
Yeah.
You can buy it. You can buy milkweed plants, swamp milkweed plants at garden centers now, but they're fairly expensive, $6-7, I think, to have a plant with this salt. But if you start your own from seed, you can do that during the winter. Start it indoors and get the little guys going. And by the time, well, you want to get by the frost, last frost in June, your plants, probably if you start them in February, they're going to be tall enough to set in to a garden. And you have to give them space to grow, but then they'll take root. And the first year, they'll probably grow to maybe 18 inches tall. And the next year, they'll be up this tall, and they're perennials. They'll a whole clump will come up, and then from one seed, and then another and another. And the end of our house, I had 38 plants in the garden across the end of our house. And we've had, I guess every year, Gene, we've had monarchs and caterpillars. Some years more than others, but yeah, pretty easy to do. And Nature New Brunswick gives out the seeds for free. Now it's a little later on in the season now to be doing it, but you can still do it, set them in before the end of summer.
That's what I was wondering. It would be too late. Like, would I be better off waiting till winter to start moving inside and do all that, or can I just put?
Well, you could try both. Yeah, the seeds will keep till another year if necessary, but you could try and experiment with some of them and see if you can get things to set them in, see what happens.
They're very slow growing then.
They're quite slow, yeah, but once they get going, they're pretty good.
And I started seed with hydroponics. I wonder if that would probably speed it up a bit.
Probably would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expect it. But in New Brunswick, sort of officially on the books, we only have natural milkweed as far as the St. John River. But our thinking with Nature New Brunswick and the St. John Baptist Club, let's give out seeds and have people plant in their gardens. And if you could, every garden had a few small milkweed plants in it. Suddenly there's twice as much acreage of milkweed across the province as there would have been before. So why not? So that's what we're trying to do.
Can you plant common milkweed as well?
Well, you can, yes, but what I found transplanting is probably as easy as anything with the common. If you go in the springtime when they're not too tall, it'd be a maze of a root system. All you need is to take, the plant and a little bit of the rhizome root and transplant that. But you don't want to put it in your garden where it's going to choke everything up. Put it somewhere on your property where I have it on our property, where our daughter lives next door. The driveway comes down, the paved road is here, and then I can mow the rest of it, contain them. Jean is mortified because she thinks it's going to tear through our lawn and into our house or something, but I know I can control it. So that's, if anything happens,
I
I'll
had
be
it in our
a
flower garden and they did a tour and I had common milkweed in the garden and all the people that came were whispering, she's got milkweed in her garden.
well, common milk. That's in the early days. Bill?
I planted it from seed in the fall, both common and swamp outside. I tried doing the indoor thing, it didn't work for me. And I've got patches of both.
Have you?
So your success is higher if you do it indoors and, like a little nursery, but it'll work also if you just plant it outside without trying to grow indoors.
What we found though is important that you either use running the seeds outside or setting plants in. Clear it all. Don't have any competition when they're just little. Because then if you get a lot of grass and stuff in there, it's harder to get them started. But if they have just nothing but space and space them out probably 18 inches apart, then they've got room to grow as a clump in the next clump.
Last question for me, can you do them in a raised garden bed?
Sorry?
Could you do them in a raised garden bed?
I can, sure, I can.
In them, that's in the lots of room.
We have friends that have them in a big pot.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they bring that pot in winter. I don't know, maybe they don't.
You have to be a little careful if you don't plant enough and you get one female laying 50 eggs, you're going to run out of milkweed. We've had distress calls. What am I going to do? There's nothing but a stick left and I've got 25 caterpillars and we help them find a wild patch to put it on. So if you only plant one or two plants, you can get into a little bit of trouble. If your patch is big enough, you should be okay.
Yeah, 6 or 8 plants is ideal. And once they get, so high, because that female will lay a bunch of eggs. And then if you've got a bunch of caterpillars that are voracious, they won't kill the plants. They'll just eat some of the leaves, right? But if it's not enough plant, they will literally just skeletonize a plant. Won't kill it or hurt it, but they don't have enough to eat. They're running out of food before they're big enough to go into Christmas. So then we have to transplant them somewhere onto a natural milkweed patch.
I think the statistics are that 80% of the small caterpillars are not going to make it through to mature.
Yeah.
It's really high.
The reason for that is there's a lot of predators.
Yeah.
There's spiders, there's ants, there's earwigs, there's wasps. A lot of things will eat or affect or hurt the little caterpillars, especially when they're small. When the caterpillar gets big, almost to the size of your little finger, they're not as vulnerable. But when they're little tiny guys, sometimes even a bigger monarch caterpillar will inadvertently eat a little guy when he's real small because he's chowing down on anything he gets. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
The conditions to plant the common and swamp, is it the same habitat? Do you have the same ease or one is a lot more tricky than the other?
No, I don't think so. And we found that swamp milkweed, ours is quite a dry spot. Don't have to have it. People think it has to be wet, but it doesn't have to be. And don't have to have really, really good soil either. I've seen common milkweed grow in almost like a gravel. Terrible, but somehow they do it once they get the roots down deep enough. Yeah, not too. Once you get them going, it's getting them started.
Your comment about the competition is well put because the first year I planted several with my grandson. We planted them at the back of the field and there was a water source there. We thought, this is not kind of thing. But what we didn't do is what would have been a huge task is to prepare that land so there was no other roots, no other plants, etc.
Yeah.
So then it made small spots and said, look, you can fend for yourself, and they did not.
Yeah.
But then planting them in a hole that I dug and prepared some earth in my lawn, they've done great.
Yeah, it's getting them started and getting some momentum going. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, so plant milkweed, protect milkweed, preserve blooming roadside plants. So if you see, if you're talking to someone who might have the influence to change the mowing there to a little later on, Nature New Brunswick is trying to convince the province that they should change the mowing in August. Here I am going down to Point de Pro on Route 1 through Charlotte County, south of St. John. And we're going to tag Monarchs today. And here they're mowing all the blooming plants down on the side of the road. And I'm just thinking, what do we have to do to get this changed? So I think over time, the other interesting thing, I'll mention this interrupted myself actually, but the monarch butterfly now in Canada is federally protected under the Species at Risk Act. It has now been declared a species at risk federally. Now that means that on federal lands, it's protected. Provincially, will follow in a year or two, apparently, but the province has to prepare its own plan for conservation of the monarch under its species at risk provincial. And it has to have an enforcement plan. If somebody's doing something, they got to be able to have a plan for that. And that's apparently going to take another couple of years. But eventually, monarch butterflies will be a protected species federally and provincially. And that will make a difference for the mowing of roadsides, again. And it also will make a difference, I think, for the railway spraying at the wrong time, because they will have to pay attention to that and adhere to protection of the butterfly and its environment, which means plants, blooming plants, and that kind of thing. Anyway, I interrupt myself. Yes, sir.
But we're obviously outside the normal range. Getting started, and if it does grow here, it's going to be on specific sites.
It's not it's not widespread here.
So my travel very, very hard roads.
Yeah.
Up in southern Ontario,
All kinds of, along St. John River Valley, all kinds of.
But here, for the soil or whatever,
It's
very uncommon. It might won't be like specific, kind of microcycles.
Well, it doesn't seem to where I've seen it growing. I've actually seen it in an old road that was up in St. Leonard. I was with Roy LaPointe, and he took me to a place where it was paved, but there were cracks in the pavement, and the common milkweed was going right up through the cracks in the pavement. Like it was like, how could this even get any water? Even how's this happening? But so wherever they get started, they seem to do okay. Okay, I'm going to finish off, and then we can have any other questions. So preserve blooming roadside plants. Okay, support monarch education efforts. Obviously, that's important. Promote monarch awareness with your family. That's children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, public, every opportunity you have. And learn about potential risks of herbicide use, more awareness, because not only monarchs, but any pollinator is affected by herbicides very easily. I can tell you a very quick little story, maybe I will. Our granddaughter, who you saw in the picture here when she was just little, holding the monarch butterfly in her hand, every school ends up with lice sometimes. And there was an outbreak of lice in her school. So she comes home and she has some nits. Okay? So her mother and Jean and I, well, Jean and her mother, got involved with getting a kit, which you sort of wash the hair and all that, comb and all that stuff. And so that was fine. And so we seemed to get rid of them. But it was a few days later, we were tagging and raising some monarchs. And so she had a couple of monarchs, and they crawled up her sleeve. We put it on her hand, and then eventually moved up. Someone got on her nose, and eventually went up into her hair. So we didn't think of it. Took them off. Eventually, it was evening. Put them back in the little cage for release in the morning. And within an hour, both of them were on the floor, flopping their last. The residual bit of whatever that poison for the nits was in her hair was still there, and it killed both of those monarchs within an hour. So I was blown away by how sensitive these insects are to that. Okay, so let's see if we got anything more. Oh yes, we do. These are Monarch tags. These are Monarch tags, and this is a tagging sheet. It was 2012, and this we record the tag number, the date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is it wild, whatever? And we tag RAT 935. That was a Monarch that actually I was fortunate enough to tag. And online that winter, I saw a photograph because someone had bought some tags for our Monarch watch from the local people in Mexico. If you look there, RAT 935 was picked up in Mexico at the very same place that we visited, El Rosario Reserve. We visited two, Chinkwa and El Rosario the next day. And so our Monarch from Point de Pro ended up going to a place that we had actually been. That was in 2013, the winter up, and we were there in 2007. And Monarch Watch, when you have a match like that in a recovery, they have a certificate of appreciation. And so what you get from them is this information. There's RAT 935, that's the tag number. Tag date, we tagged it August 30th. Point de Pro, found February 27th, that winter. I have the name of the gentleman that turned it in, by the way, Mexican gentleman. And location El Rosario, distance traveled 4,251 kilometers, straight line, Point de Pro, El Rosario. I mean, butterfly obviously would have gone further because it would have made its way. But that was a major event. We know that our butterflies have the ability to get all the way down there. And there was a second one that winter that was also found. And they're the only two, and we've been tagging 20 years, the only two that have made it all the way to Mexico. That were discovered. That have been discovered, correct, exactly. And the reason why they were discovered, Peter, was that it was an exceptionally cold winter down there. And a lot of it was quite a die-off of monarchs that fell to the ground. So undoubtedly others have made it, but made it back simply to lay eggs and were never found. So this is my wrap-up slide. Okay, and I guess I'll wrap it up by saying, all of this is beyond our understanding. Anyways, how does all this work? How does it work for so many things? How does salmon go to Greenland waters back to Miramichi? How do many things work in nature? Birds migrate that have never migrated, coming out of the Arctic, a shorebird flies to Hudson Bay, Bay of Fundy, on down to South America. All of that, in the case of monarchs, and I guess the case of all the others, is programmed somehow in that little egg, the size of the head of a pin. And there's so much we don't know. And so when you learn more and more in nature, there's so many more questions that you have. It's just the way it goes. So that's a little bit of an overview of the monarch butterfly, as best as I can make it. And time for questions. There's a question right there.
Has anybody came up with theories on why they're going to this specific species of pine at high altitude in Mexico?
Great question. You have to ask. Phil, from what I've read, but it's not a specific theory on that, but apparently monarchs are thought to have been a tropical butterfly way back. There wasn't, before settlement in North America, particularly east of the Rockies, there was not very many open areas. The prairies were there, but in the east, central and east, it was all forest. So there were no openings, or not many, maybe a fire, but there wasn't the ability for milkweed to spread. Okay, but with settlement, milkweed moved north, it's thought, and so with it moves the monarchs. Apparently, there was an evolution of this migration thing, but originally they were a tropical butterfly. So that may have something to do with way back origins, that part of Mexico for the winter. Who knows?
Are we talking millions of years or?
I don't know how long they've been around.
But it also is the perfect temperature up in the mountains. It allows them to not, they don't go into a hibernation, but they go into a more dormant state. And it's that coolness that makes it happen. Every time the sun comes out and it gets a little warmer, they get up and fly around a little bit. And as soon as it gets cold again, then they go back into this dormant state. So it seems like it's the absolutely perfect conditions. And maybe others around, but for some reason it's I don't know, it was just the most spectacular thing you could ever imagine to see them.
It should be on your bucket list.
I don't know if it's that easy anymore.
There's
a yellow one there too, a yellow butterfly. It looks almost the same as a monarch,
Yeah, it is pretty big.
but they're not related at all.
No, it's called a swallowtail. It's called the Canadian tiger swallowtail, and it'll come out around the 1st of June.
Yeah.
Here, all kinds of them.
Yeah.
And then it'll be gone by early July.
There's no history like that is, and that's the same thing.
Yeah, totally different. Yeah, altogether different species.
There is one that mimics it.
There is one that, yeah, good point, Jane. There is one of our butterflies. It doesn't migrate, doesn't go anywhere. It's like all our other regular butterflies, but it looks almost identical to a monarch. It's called a viceroy. And it's thought that it's possibly a mimic that's evolved to the monarch. Because if monarchs are distasteful and look slightly poisonous, if you look like a monarch, maybe somebody can leave you alone a little more than on average, maybe. So it's a little smaller. It flies a little differently, but it's called a viceroy. Viceroy. Yeah, if you look it up online, you'll find it.
Is a monarch the only one that migrates?
There are other butterflies that winter further to the south of us that migrate up here, but nothing anywhere close to the 4,000 kilometers faithfully every year like these guys do.
How much is known about of these other butterflies, such as the red admiral and the question mark? How much is known about them migrating some?
I honestly don't know that, Peter. There's some years when we get lots and lots of them, and other years when they're almost absent, like red admirals, or the other one is the ladies, painted lady and American lady.
Sulfur.
Yeah, right. I honestly don't know. Partly because I haven't researched that really. I kind of get tangled up with monarchs. It didn't get any further. But yeah, so there are others, but it's nothing like this predictable, very specific long distance. They've discovered that some of the dragonflies in the world are also long distance migrants. That's fairly recent, but I don't know much about that. But the monarch is not the only insect, but it's the only butterfly that we know of that makes that kind of migration. Holly, did you have a question?
The question is partly already answered, because I knew that there was one other that's kind of like you said, how many have seen a monarch? I know I've seen monarchs, but now I don't know if I'm seeing a monarch.
That's another great question.
There's this mimic, so
Okay.
So is there, besides size, is there any other definitive, I just need to look at this and then I'll know, oh, it's a monarch or it's a vice?
Well, there is. You know how a turkey vulture flies? A bald eagle will fly like this. A turkey vulture holds its wings in a dihedral, okay? And it allows it to soar, and it hardly has to flap very much. It can catch a thermal, which is rising column of air on a hot day, and it can stay in that thermal and rise up without having to flap. Monarchs hold their wings in a dihedral as well, which other butterflies don't. And they'll soar with the dihedral. Okay, so it's pretty obvious. That's the first thing. They'll flap and they'll soar, and the wing is held in a dihedral position. And they're large, and they're orange and black. So all other orange and black butterflies are smaller than a monarch, and they don't hold that dihedral position when they soar. Okay? And talking about soaring, in migration, monarchs will catch thermals, as hawks do in migration. The sun shines on the earth, and some parts of the earth's surface will absorb the heat, radiant heat, and other parts of the earth, some areas will reflect it. And so where areas that reflect it, it develops a invisible rising column of air. And so migrating hawks and monarch butterflies seek those rising columns of air out during migration or just during normal foraging. And that's why they're holding a dihedral, they just have to tilt and they can turn in a very tight circle, stay within that and rise to 3,000-4,000 feet on a really strong thermal, and then come out of that, soar on, find the next one up it goes, soar on, and that's how they migrate pretty efficiently on hot days without having to expend a lot of energy. Both hawks do that, but I say both. Hawks do that, soaring hawks in migration, those that go long distances, like the broad-winged hawk, Swainson's hawk in the west, they go all the way to Central South America, like the monarchs. And so that's a strategy they've evolved separately, but very effective.
When they're in Mexico, Jim, so another question, they are continuing to eat, they're not like dormant in appetite.
They don't eat very much during the winter. They will take the opportunity to eat, but there's not many blooming plants where they are during the winter. They do need moisture, one thing they need, and they will go on nice days. Some of them will go and drink at a little stream or whatever somewhere. So they do need some moisture to keep their moisture up. But eating, they just basically become pretty dormant, and they will store fats in the fall and lipids and retain that.
This fur that they've said
The oil fir trees,
yeah, they're not feeding that on that.
no, just resting there.
So
But as Gene said, and it's important to understand and Phil, to your question, that climate that's created by the oil fir canopy has just the right moisture conditions, humidity conditions, and temperature within a certain range during the critical, January, February, part of March, December maybe, for them to do just fine, unless there's very, very unusual weather. So that's evolved somehow, and that's why they go to that particular spot. It may be over time that they've tried other areas and it didn't work, and then those ones did, so they go back.
Monarchs have an amazing ability to find milkweed.
Yes.
And we know that from experience because we tried to grow some milkweed in a gravel pit. Had absolutely no nutrients in it. And some of them came up maybe an inch, maybe. And we sort of spread it like this. So where they had come up, there was just little rows of them here and there where the seed landed.
Little tiny 1 inch.
Tiny little things. And the next time we visited that area, there were caterpillars.
On eating these little tiny.
On these little tiny plants. So we had to rescue them. And which was, I don't know, it was stupid of us to try to grow there. It was, obviously not going to grow. But, and for 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, we would go back and find these caterpillars crawling around on this gravel.
Like out in the desert almost, looking for another plant.
So you rescue them and you find some milkweed for them. But that's how sensitive they are to milkweed and how easy it is for them to find it.
They can smell it.
Yeah.
A long way away. So any other questions? Yes.
Isn't that part of Mexico where they migrate? Is it a protected area?
It is a protected area. Yeah.
Or don't people?
It's actually a hemispheric, what's the World Heritage Site.
Protected.
Yeah, it is. And the government of Mexico is very proud of that. But at the same time, there's a lot of graft and whatever for this illegal logging. So it's, as soon as backs are turned, sometimes that happens. So, but they've really clamped down on it in the last president or two.
You know the name of the state where it is?
It's in Michoacan.
Michoacan, yeah.
Yep.
I was
Have you been there?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to see where they are, but there's a lot of those there, shops with butterfly things.
Yeah. You go to El Rosario, where the recovery of the tagged ones were, and we visited along with Chinqua, which is another one. El Rosario has, it's highly developed commercially. It's owned by individual families, mountaintop, and they have a beautiful reception center. You have to hire a guide to take you up the mountain to see them, but it's like $5 or $2 or something. It's pretty cheap. And and they have all kinds of, anything. You could have Monarch mugs, Monarch t-shirts, Monarch underwear.
Butterflies and all that.
Yeah.
The last time you were there,
We were there in 2007.
oh, it changed a lot now.
I'll bet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very commercial. It was very expensive when I was there to go up.
Was it? Wow. Where did you stay? Excuse me. Where did you stay in Angangara? Was a little. Okay. Wow.
Sometimes the expense is the salvation of the place, though, and the species they're trying to protect, because
Yes.
when poaching or logging is so lucrative, then you have to find some alternative. And there are some places where they've taken poachers and turned them into guides, because it gives them a livelihood, but it is protecting the species.
Yes.
You know, that's happening in many places, like I'm thinking of mountain gorillas in Congo, Rwanda, etc., and the monarchs, and I bet we could collectively brainstorm and think of several other places. It seems kind of weird. Why do you take people that are putting this species at risk and give them a great job, but it's a solution?
Well, it's not the
that
same
seems to
people.
work,
It's
right?
not the same people. The people that are working in those places are local people that would be very pro-monarch. The logging part is going to be the cartels and things that are able to buy their way into that and see and extract some of that out. There's two different populations there, I think.
The advantage of having such a, if you want to call it commercial, but developed area to go see them is they bring busloads of children in every day. When we were there, there had to be 25 or 30 busloads of children that came to go up the mountain to see the monarchs.
Yeah, and every child has that opportunity. And I gave a talk to, I can't remember what school it was now. I think it was in Fredericton. It was in Fredericton. The teacher wanted me to talk about monarchs. And in the class was an exchange student, young man from Mexico, from the immediate area of the, he knew all about everything. He lived right there near the sanctuary. So we had a great chat about things. And I had been to places he's talking about.
The other reserve that we went to was completely different. It was just
Yes.
a path going up the mountain. Yeah.
That was the one where I showed the photographs from.
Yeah.
It was a nice sunny day and it was like going for a walk in the woods. Yeah. Anyway, you folks have got an annual meeting you got to deal with. You don't want me hanging on here any longer and talking. So is that enough? Hopefully. Yeah. Peter, can I get the little thingy that's for changing the slides? I will forget it and that's.
So thank you very much, Jim, on behalf of the club. Very much appreciated. I remember my first experience with milkweed. We lived in rural Ontario, and on the weekend I'd go out to classmate farms, and I remember the father, about 9 years old, give me a ride on the tractor in the field. He stopped, jumped out, showed me a milkweed plant, and showed me why it was called a milkweed.
Yeah.
Broke it. No, he didn't say anything about monarch butterflies, but that's my first memory of milkweed many years ago.
A small PS, I know lots of us are readers, and there's a wonderful book by Barbara Kinsolver, maybe you've read it, Flight Pattern.
Oh, I haven't read, I know of it.
It's about the monarch butterfly. I mean, there's a side story, and I think she, like many authors, went through great pains to do good research and present. It's a connection between the migration. She